About this time last year, I was going through a bit of a crisis after suffering the loss of my pet. It certainly wasn't the first time I experienced loss, or even the first time I lost a beloved pet, but something about losing Luffy felt completely different. Hindsight being 2020 and all, losing him was the first time I had to face the feelings of grief head on without any way to distract myself from the discomfort. That really sucked, but I found a way to process it in real time. That's actually the reason this video was made in the first place. 1 year later, and I think back to those times that I was grieving as if I was a completely different person. I've heard that everyone has their own way of grieving, but few people mention just how intense it can really be. The 5 stages of grief model can only take us so far after all, but to my surprise, grief as a part of a character's story arc is much more common than what I previously thought, given the unflattering nature of the emotion. Then again, I don't watch a good deal of long-running series either, so it could just be me being a dingus and missing out. What I found interesting is how grief is usually paired with more supernatural phenomena in movies. Supernatural/horror movies, where grief is the central focus of the story, tend to have a physical entity as a stand-in for the main character to combat those negative feelings in a tangible way. It's in the same way that zombie and vampire movies use those monsters as stand-ins for the fears of societal collapse and underworld societies respectively. But those two examples usually deal with a group of monsters going against a group of survivors. Grief monsters differ in that the entities are singularly focused on one individual, which makes the whole ordeal extremely personal and isolating, in the same way that no two people can experience grief exactly the same. The Babadook is a good example of this. On the surface, the movie has the same monster of the week energy that a lot of horror movies from that time gave off. But about halfway into it, you start to get the feeling that there's more at play than some big bad terrorizing this random woman and her child. A good portion of this film sits firmly in the slow burn category, with how many scenes following this woman and her kid's life as it begins to unravel. And there's only hints of the core theme until we get to the end game, and everything is falling apart around them. A lot of people in the comments under the YouTube trailer have pointed this out as well. It might not be the first of its kind, but it kicked off the trend of grief horrors being more accepted amongst the mainstream, like Hereditary, and to an extent, it follows as well. One of the core tricks to movies about grief is that you don't really go into the movie expecting it to be about grief initially. The grief-focused nature only reveals itself after we have spent a decent amount of time with the characters and come to understand that whatever the conflict of the movie is deeply affecting them specifically, more so than the rest of the cast. This in turn draws on us, the audience, to develop more sympathy for said character because, let's face it, it sucks to watch someone going through a rough time. Unfortunately, this can lead to the overall reception of the movie being rather hit or miss. If I'm being honest, in those cases I can't even really fault the people that feel like they got baited, because at the end of the day, they're wanting to see something cool and not be reminded of anything going on in the real world. Let's take a look at Talk to Me, for example. Many people, myself included, saw the trailer and thought, wow, a new possession type movie is coming out. That looks sick. But it goes deeper than that by a long shot. The first 2 scenes of the movie set us up for a standard ghost story. But as we shadow Mia following the death of her mother, we're told indirectly through her interactions with family and friends that she's not acting like her usual self. She's clearly taking the loss hard, which has made her exceptionally vulnerable not only to peer pressure, but to the supernatural as well. In the scene where the hand is introduced, Mia jumps at the chance to be the first to interact with it as a way to seek validation from the group around her. Her first possession is pretty intense, but paradoxically, she becomes addicted to the sensation it provides. This later leads to a lapse in judgment when Mia allows her best friend's younger brother to interact with the hand, which conjures the spirit of Mia's mother to speak to her to disastrous effect. The added trauma of Riley's disfigurement at her hands leads to Mia becoming more unstable as the movie progresses, which feeds the cycle of grief and makes her more vulnerable to manipulation by the spirit she's being haunted by. And the spirit takes full advantage of this fact. At her lowest point, Mia attempts to commune with the spirit out of desperation, and the spirit obliges by taking the form of her mother once again, in order to exert more control over Mia's actions. The fact that the spirit was cunning enough to prey on Mia's vulnerability during her grieving is evil in its own right, but Mia realistically didn't stand a chance to begin with. The general consensus is that people that have experienced a great loss or other kind of significant traumatic event are given an abundant amount of space and time to heal naturally. The grief model is well documented for good reason, and it's understood that a person going through the thick of it isn't in the best mindset for dealing with outside influences. A person experiencing that level of vulnerability could be coerced into doing almost anything if it offered a fast track to return what was lost to them. Which brings me into the second movie, Meanwhile on Earth. It's not exactly a horror per se, but it leans more into the science fiction realm of things. Released in 2022, the film follows Elsa as she lives in the aftermath of her astronaut brother being lost in space. Things start off a bit slow in the beginning, but it's not long until she gets contacted by her brother and subsequently by someone or something demanding cooperation in order for her brother to return. Most would assume this to be some kind of cruel prank, or at the very least, something dark and ominous to avoid. But Elsa is still 3 years into the grieving process of the loss of her brother, so she doesn't hesitate to follow the voice's commands. Now, there isn't a lot of visual flair for the movie, but in my opinion, it helps in adding to the realism of the situation. There's a straight up alien replacement plot being set in motion by the voices with the help of Elsa, but through her eyes, all of this is simply a means to an end to get her brother back. The invasion doesn't involve any giant spaceships or little green men. It's very quiet, in fact. And through the process, we're only given a crumb of information regarding what happens to the people that have been body snatched. As we follow Elsa, we can see that internally she takes issue with what she's being instructed to do, but it's the only opportunity she has to go get her brother back. With the added weight of grief, she doesn't afford herself the chance to dwell on the morality of the situation until her final victim has been chosen. Towards the end of the movie, Elsa is given the opportunity of a free sacrifice, no strings attached, to complete the final body snatch in order to return her brother from space. But on the way to the designated abduction site, she has a sudden change of heart. Luckily for that guy, the weight of all that she has done to appease the voice in her head reached a tipping point all at once, and she couldn't go through with the last offering to the aliens. She reached a point of clarity at a crucial moment and effectively saved that guy's life without him ever realizing it. This comes at a heavy cost, however, as Elsa breaks down in her car, apologizing to her brother for the final time as she forfeits the one chance she has to save him. Shortly after this, though, we follow her with her now adopted pet as they explore the coastline, and Elsa accepts the loss of her brother and begins to live more presently than before. Unlike Talk to Me, Meanwhile on Earth ends on a more positive note, as Elsa reaches the acceptance stage of grief and comes out the other end changed but whole. Grief is like a double whammy of an experience. Not only do you suffer from the trauma, but you effectively lose yourself as well. It's no wonder that filmmakers liken it to its own form of possession, because for most, if not all of the duration, you're not truly yourself in those moments. Fortunately, grief and suffering don't have to go hand in hand. As we've seen the example with Elsa, it is possible to get through the emotion of grief and come out the other end in a better place, but it's exceedingly rare that you go through it unscathed. It's not necessarily that it gets better on its own, but you get better with time. And that growth is the core of the whole experience. There were days when I dreaded coming home from work because I didn't want to face the silence of the house with the absence of my buddy. But now, a year later, the most peaceful time of my day is when I come home and sit out in the backyard next to his grave to decompress for a minute before I have to start moving again. It came with time, don't get me wrong. But to paraphrase a quote from one of my favorite YouTubers, the fastest way to heal is to stop pretending that it doesn't matter.